Hey everyone, welcome to the next installment in our advocacy training series where we'll be discussing the lessons learned from the COVID-19 impact on advocacy. Before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that this call is being recorded for future playback. If you don't want to be recorded, now's your chance to leave the call. So with that, my name is Ali Rahimi. I'm the Grassroots Advocacy Manager for Voices for Healthy Kids. Joining me today are Stephanie Baum, Director of Customer Success at Phone to Action, and Jimena Hartzog, Co-founder of Phone to Action. Stephanie and Jimena will provide an overview of the lessons learned from the advocacy boom, as well as some best practices for advocacy engagement that Voices for Healthy Kids can help you capitalize on. Next slide. So some general housekeeping before we get started. I want to reiterate that this call is being recorded and will be available early next week for playback. So again, if you don't want to be recorded, now's your chance to leave the call. All lines are muted and questions should be asked in the chat, which we'll be actively monitoring throughout the course of the presentation. We will also have time at the end for questions. Next slide. And before we officially begin, I want to announce our next webinar series, which will cover social media for advocacy. On September 30th, we will provide an overview of social media for advocacy. On the second part, which will be held on October 14th, we'll discuss campaign applications of social media. Following that, on October 28th, we will discuss social media as it relates to community management. And finally, on November 12th, we will host a skills lab. More information and registration for these events will be sent via email, so keep an eye out for that. And while I'm placing plugs, I want to throw one in for the Voices for Healthy Kids Policy Campaign Grant. The deadline for the short form application for the grant is this Sunday, September 20th, 2020. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie and Jimena.
Great, thank you so much, Ali, and thank you all for joining us today. It was really great to be together a couple weeks ago to talk a little bit about Phone to Action and implementing that for some of your work. And today we have the privilege of talking about the COVID effect, so lessons learned from the advocacy boom. Really lucky to have our co-founder, Jimena Hartzog, join us today. She was really the brains behind a lot of this work. She worked with a team of data scientists and dove into years and years of data from Phone to Action and comparing it to what we were seeing in the advocacy space during COVID. So I want to encourage you to jump in with any questions. Feel free to chat. There's nothing that's off limits. We're really looking forward to presenting this today and want to make it as much of a conversation as possible. Jimena, would you like to introduce yourself as well before we dive in?
Thank you so much, Steffi, for those kind words, and also thanks to the American Heart Association for organizing this very important conversation today. Voices for Healthy Kids advocacy training series are really giving a tremendous opportunity to learn about this moment that it will be in the history books in the years to come, and capturing the real-time conversation and the questions are as much instructive as the information is. So I feel very honored to be part of this conversation today, and thank you for having me. Like Steffi said, I am the co-founder of Phone to Action, and for the past month, since March, I have been almost fully dedicated to looking at the data for two reports. One is a weekly report that we used to have called the Digest, that we used to send to you all every week. And now that discontinued, we stopped that because we're writing a very large report called the State of Advocacy. So you will see that available the first week of October. And some of this data here, you probably have not seen before, maybe some you have, but the most important thing, just as an intro, is that this was a quantitative look. So that is some anecdotal data, but this is controlled, this normalized data is statistically significant. So whatever you see here, you can actually quote because we did validate it from different angles. So it's reliable and valid. With all of that, let's get started.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jimena. And Jimena and I both come from education and early childhood and health background. So would love to, think about how this applies to a lot of the work that you're doing as well. Again, so in March, we really saw the world of digital advocacy change. Pandemic brought new challenges. Fly-ins were canceled, traditional lobbying had to be halted. And as the national emergency started, we saw an eruption in digital advocacy. So just for some numbers to help give some context here, in the week after the national emergency was declared, we saw over 1,000 campaigns launched on the Phone to Action platform. And in that week, more than 1 million people took action, sending almost to 2.4 million messages to lawmakers. So we've drawn on a lot of research and looking forward to diving into some of these lessons learned. The number one lesson learned after looking at all of the data is that urgency drives action. So we came to a clear conclusion that COVID-19 brought intense immediacy to many issues. And this was reflected in the fact that pre-COVID versus post-COVID, we saw conversion rates almost triple. So there was a lot of urgency that drove action. This chart here shows comparison of some of the campaigns that performed the best versus those that had the least activity, and the language that we continue to see coming up again. Urge, critical, immediate, utmost importance. So this language of urgency really helped drive conversions. And then you can notice some of the more passive language in the right-hand column about collect stories, fill out this questionnaire. So the lesson learned here is really to keep it short. Attention spans are shorter now than ever, so save the long intros. We really encourage you to be concise about the facts and present a clear call to action.
Yes, and the other thing about advocacy today too is that negativity works more than optimism, unfortunately. And so when people are seeing a campaign in front of them where they see a real threat, a risk of losing something, they tend to act faster. And then later on, Steffi is going to talk about social shares. And what we saw is that these words on the left also drove higher social shares. So people not only felt compelled to act, but they also asked and tried to influence their friends and family members to do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk through a little bit of what we see as the anatomy of a quality call to action, and these couple things that stand out: being concise, urgent, inspiring, and having a clear call to action. I don't know about you all, but I feel like we're bombarded more than ever with information, and our attention spans are short. And so we'll talk through a campaign example that really follows all of these different elements. Concise being, if anything, you have to scroll on your phone in order to get to the place where you take action, it's probably too long. That level of urgency, what are we going to lose if we don't take this action? Inspiring, a lot of your advocate stories, I think, are some of the most inspiring things to highlight. And having a clear call to action. What are you asking your advocates to do? Who are you asking them to contact? And being very clear there. The second lesson learned as we dove into the data is that everyone takes action, but women, Gen Xers, and millennials are leading the way. So we often hear about young people driving digital activism, but in the past months, we've actually seen activity increase across the board. So this chart compares pre-COVID, post-COVID, across a couple different generations. What has the activity increase been? So you'll see boomers have increased about 86%, Gen Z about 155%, millennials 180, and Gen Xers have actually led the way with their activity increase. So Jimena, I don't know if you have anything to add here, but would love to hear.
Absolutely. So one thing that we tend to forget is that Gen Xers are the wider age group. So it's if you're really going for volume, that's your age range, and you gotta think about anyone over 35 all the way to 58. So it's a pretty wide number, and those tend to be people who are working mothers, fathers, people that are active in society. So, and that are completing a lot of the roles of a person. So, you know, an adult basically is in this group. And so we tend sometimes to focus on the very young people, the Gen Z, or the young millennials, but if you want to only target one group, and you have to decide, Gen Xers are the way to go. And we saw this across all types of organizations. But one thing also that we saw that it was very interesting is that women are much quicker to act in all groups. And women over 65, so boomers who are women, also use new tools like Twitter. There is a campaign of Consumer Reports where 10% of their Twitter activity came from women over 65. So that is actually different. We didn't see the same data. We compared with January and February of the same year, and we didn't see that. So what if it feels that COVID did is that COVID accelerated the penetration of devices at home. So people that didn't feel necessarily very comfortable using a cell phone or an iPad or a particular app, uh, like Zoom or WhatsApp, they did accelerate it during this period of time. So that changes the playbook moving on, because we didn't focus on, people over 65 using Twitter, but now moving on is something else in your repertoire of tools and strategies that you can use, because during this time, the boomers start using technology to connect with their grandkids or to whoever in ways that they were not expected to happen by 2020.
That's a perfect segue actually into our third lesson learned, that mobile is a participation equalizer. So phone to action was founded or named inspired by the belief that mobile phones would eventually become the driving force in digital engagement. So when Jimena founded Phone to Action in 2012, adoption of mobile devices was pretty low across demographics. Today we're seeing 95% mobile phone penetration and 79% smartphone adoption. I think there were some theories that maybe we would see a big uptick in desktop participation. People are at home more during the pandemic. But what we found is pretty surprising to me, that still close to 70% of all activity across phone to action advocacy campaigns was on mobile. Mm-hmm. About 25, 26 on desktop, and the rest on tablets. Mm-hmm. So oh, go ahead.
And I think, when I think about at home, I have a 2-year-old, almost 1.5-year-old, and he keeps walking, right? Like he's in the house, navigating the house. So I carry my phone around. I think what you may, even when people are working from home and they have their computers on, they are browsing the internet and responding to notifications on their mobile devices as they are in the house. Sometimes you have to do two things at the same time. You have to, do laundry and work. Like the schedules that we have at home are not the same that the one before COVID. So I think that's why mobile engagement has continued. And also there is the aspect of broadband. Not everyone has access to broadband across the country, and that was a little bit exacerbated, that gap with technology, with the COVID. So at the top here, you see Blackberries and games. The reason we highlight those is because we found that some groups, and here are the young people for the most part, the Gen Z generation, that are usually on their games, and they do interact with campaigns from those games or those chat rooms. So we found a percentage, hundreds actually, of people using a Nintendo, PlayStation, and some forms of Minecraft, and even Pokemon Go during the past year. And there are some people that still have Blackberries, so not everybody has a smartphone. And there has some flip phones there that we can also identify. So this tells you overall the takeaway is that mobile is still the way to go, and that phone to action has technology embedded in the product to mobilize, to optimize your mobile experience. And I think here Steph is going to show you how this campaign was mobile optimized. But the campaigns generally, pretty much any technology that you use today is using some kind of mobile optimization, but there are advanced settings that you should always try to remember to use, because that can optimize by 30% the experience a person has on their mobile device. And for example, it shrinks the picture, makes the picture load faster, it shrinks the text, it does different things to that experience the person has, that when they see the call to action on their cell phone, they're able to act. I remember even a few years ago, people will click on something on a cell phone, and it depends on the size of your screen, the experience that you will get. Today, for interactions, mobile optimization accounts for this different width and the overall size of the screen. And that's extremely important, because if the person doesn't see the submit button in an area that is close to their thumb, they will not take action. You only have a few seconds for a person to act, and any scrolling, any distraction, any loading time is an obstacle and stands between you and your advocacy. So mobile optimization is key.
Absolutely. And this is exactly what Habena was referencing. This page is, I think, beautiful on desktop, but as you're thinking about anywhere from 70 up toward 90% of your advocates taking action on mobile, we're going to decrease this to really see what that looks like on mobile. So the campaign content, the image, this went from 3 paragraphs to 2 sentences. And the advocate can click on that to read more information. But this is clear, the take action forms, the clear call to action. There's a level of urgency. So particularly women and girls are most at risk of being left behind in response efforts. The submit button, the send email is very clear. I don't have to scroll down in order to find that, and then I can send my email. And then this is what we reference the share with others. So after an advocate has taken action, this opportunity actually had to share on social media. And then this one actually redirected to be able to donate. So you're working with advocates that are engaged enough to send an email, and then thinking about what's the next action I want them to take. I'm going to go back just to share on social media so we can see that. So that option is after you complete an action, and that's also here in the footer. So share with others, I'm going to click on Twitter, and then a pre-written tweet written by the organization CARE in this example, by you and within your organization. That COVID-19 knows no borders and we must band together. It's going to link out to the Phone to Action campaign page, and it has this really striking image that has a clear call to action as well. Help stop the spread. So as an advocate, I've just taken action, and now I have the ability to share on my social media. So then Ali, my friend on Twitter, is scrolling through his timeline, and he sees that I've shared this campaign. He has a level of trust with me. So there's instantly a level of trust with CARE that's established there. He clicks on this and is able to see that same campaign that I took action on. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we saw with social share, but just wanted to highlight that user experience when an advocate completes an action, having the ability to share on social media. From here, we'll go back. And I will reshare. All right. And then as we go into lesson learned number 4, Really, one of the striking findings was that momentum is strong. These two charts talk about get out the vote activity. So, and oftentimes in tandem with an advocacy ask of contacting your lawmaker, the encouragement to encourage your advocates to register to vote, find their polling place, encourage their friends to be registered. So the trending GOTV activity from January, there was a spike in March. And then we saw a little bit of a dip after the CARES Act was passed. And then after the killing of George Floyd, a strong increase in GOTV activity. So Jimena, would be interested to kind of add more that you saw there.
So we have been following the data since 2012. So we are lucky to have election data. So we compare this with 2016, 2018, and 2020 started as a normal year with more elections activity and less advocacy activity. So most organizations had a less steep beginning for advocacy. It will be a lot more flat in January, but you see this red line from January to February is pretty steep. It's pretty vertical, and it's because it's an election year. And these are only get out the vote type of activities. And then March came, the declaration of emergency was on March 13, and the passage of the stimulus, first stimulus of the CARES Act was in March 26. And the Saturday, the 21st, is where the peak is that you see there. That's when we had a huge decline all the way to April, because during the March, those March weeks, most of the country was focused on trying to get help to the frontliners after the pandemic was declared. And so basically across the board, almost every single user of Phone to Action, get out the vote tools, including celebrities through headcount, like people like Ariana Grande or Billie Eilish, everyone stopped election. With our election data almost went all the way to the bottom. But then at the end of March, at the end of May, on May 25th, George Floyd that happened. And on May 28th is where you see the little dot over there. And that's where the protests heavily started. That was at the end of that week. And the protest we did not see a correlation between the protests and advocacy. We saw a correlation between the protests and election data. So you see all of that line quickly, super steep, going up. And the trend that you see on the right side is the trend that we're seeing now. In fact, today, that line is a lot more vertical than is even there, because the most activity that we have seen is in the past 3 months, with September being already the top months of all. And we expect September and October to go like that. The takeaway of this is really that, yes, 2020 was a different type of year. For the first time in an election year, we see both advocacy activity and elections activity hand by hand, with very little sign of exhaustion or getting tired from people, which was a little bit of a concern in the years past, that you didn't want to saturate or overexpose people to campaigns, worry that they will get tired of it. We don't see exhaustion today. We see organizations with 29 campaigns in 3 months, no sign of exhaustion. But on top of that, we see, this election interest really widen across the board, especially in companies with corporate responsibility goals and trade associations. Nonprofits are leading the advocacy in elections this year, just like they did in the past, but trade associations see the highest increase in this. The momentum is extremely strong. And my advice to everyone listening right now is that if you felt about thinking about or doubting whether being hesitant about doing one more campaign, we do not see exhaustion yet. And also the momentum for people leading to the election is so high the desire to take action is so high that if they do not take action with you, they will be taking action with someone else. So, that do a campaign so you can benefit from that momentum.
Yep, and that brings us to our fifth and final lesson learned here, that our social networks are influential. So I just walked through an example of a Twitter social share. The experience on Facebook is very similar. I share on Facebook a pre-filled image. I'm able to share that, and then my Facebook followers are again able to see that campaign or that infographic. And some really interesting things that we found from the beginning of the year to post-COVID. And that was the increase in social share activity. So you see here on Facebook, over a 400% increase in advocates after they take action, having a willingness to share that campaign on their social media. Again, Twitter, almost over 150% increase there. And we found the most effective way to acquire new advocates since March has been encouraging your advocates to share on social media to their followers. I think there's probably a combination of this sense of urgency. So this is a topic that's impacting me, my child's education, or I'm a healthcare worker, or we need relief for, wages. This is something that means enough to me that I want anyone and everyone to hear about it. And we're seeing folks being willing to share on social networks. Yeah, and then we also see a really interesting finding about these new advocates that come in. So I, as a longtime advocate of your organization, I share on social media, and my cousin joins our advocacy network. We're seeing these new advocates are sticky, meaning that they are coming back to take action at extremely high rates. Pre to post COVID, 7,000% higher than before COVID. And I think part of that is what we talked about, is that instant level of trust that my cousin now has with your organization, because I'm the one that's promoting it. And so we're seeing your advocates' influence is greater now than ever. And the people that they draw in are likely to stick around and take action at extremely high rates.
One quick thing about this, and I cannot stress this enough, we looked at data of organizations that sometimes do paid advertisement to get new advocates, and that they not necessarily may have the followers that you have. And even for those organizations, companies that go outside their employee list, they saw social shares as the number one way to get people to come in. So this means whatever a campaign anyone saw, or those campaigns that people felt so compelled to share, that person has so much power in that network that exposed the campaign to, that not only got new people to act, but they got new people to act that were willing to stick around and act over and over again. So it's like having recruiters going out there to evangelize around your mission, and then bring in the best possible advocates to come back. And we see 7,000% higher is huge. That means that last year and the years past, the people that were coming as new advocates, in whichever way they were coming, they were not necessarily people who sticked around. They may have taken action in one campaign and not in more. But the ones that we see now, and we believe is because of the power of social networks. Like Steffi said, if you trust your friend, you trust the message, that people are willing to stick around and join your campaigns. But we also see that it's a lot more tolerance today than it was in the past, with people managing more than one type of campaign and taking action on more than one device. The hesitance that we saw in the past, when people may look at a campaign and not necessarily take action right away, we see that when we measure the phone calls, we can see the number of seconds a person stays on the phone. that hesitance has decreased dramatically. So people are more courageous, more willing, more energized to speak up. And that is something we believe is here to stay, because it has been changed not just by the urgency of COVID or the protest, but it's actually a new way people are engaging with lawmakers, with society, because of the use of technology for everything that they do.
Yeah. And again, feel free to bring in any questions to the chat. We'll try to take them as they come in. We're going to transition to how do those lessons learned really inform best practices. And so again, from the months and months since COVID and lots of data and research, we have come up with really 4 best practices that we'd like to share. But again, feel free to drop any questions, comments, thoughts. Maybe you've seen some of this in your own work, or maybe you've seen the opposite, and you're welcome to share some of those stories, and we can speak to that as well. One of the first best practices, I'm going to pass this to Mena because she's seen this time and time again and can really speak to it.
Yes. So we saw, no matter which way you cut the data, that Thursdays were the very best day. We saw this when we looked at, just COVID data, or just the data before COVID, or the protest data. We saw last week when we look at September's data. Thursdays are the day that across the board are the very best days to send the campaign out and get people to act. So the highest numbers of people taking action across the board will do it on a campaign sent on a Thursday. Now, you get about 4 days after you send a campaign for people to act. The number 1 activity day is going to be the same day. And normally people that took action the most did it around between 1 p.m., between noon and 3 p.m. But we saw a lot of activity also at 11 a.m., noon, but between noon and 2 to 3 p.m. was when we saw that most of the concentrated activity was. So we didn't see anything in the evenings, and we didn't see anything before 10 a.m. that got people to take action in a campaign. If you try campaigns at 9 a.m. on Thursdays, you may get also some action, because we did see education campaigns doing well at 9 a.m. on Thursdays. And I think that has to do with parents, being able to check on email at around that time for their kids or something like that. But Thursdays is the day. And the second day after the Thursday, so you will get some activity on Friday, you will get some activity on Saturday, and then on Sunday it will fade away, and you will get almost nothing on Monday. So if you have a campaign that you are not seeing enough action, wait a few days, wait about 5 days, and send it again. Mm-hmm. And then you will get a second wave of actors. That's what we saw in campaigns. So you see spike, like it goes up and down. But Thursday being the best day. Now, if you can't send it on a Thursday because for whatever reason you cannot send it on a Thursday, Tuesdays and Wednesdays follow. So Thursday followed by Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
And we have a question in the chat. So what's the best way to capitalize on new people who are engaged and get them sharing on their own organizational or personal social media sites?
So people will not share campaigns that are boring, right? So if you saw the language before, the quick, right? Quick, concise, urgent, inspiring, includes a call to action. People will share something they feel proud of sharing because it's their voice. So when you write that, think about, would I share this campaign? If I see this, would I feel okay sharing it with my friends in Facebook and my coworkers in LinkedIn? Would I feel okay doing that? And then if it works for you, you have to add the possibility that it will work with a very large percentage of people in your network. If you want to try a couple of different types of social share, which you can, you may get a wider range if you change a little bit of the tone and the voice to attract a different audience. But people who share, they're sharing the message. They already believe generally in what you are trying to push, but it's that message what gets them to share. So believing in your cause is not enough for them to share. And you will see this when you post something on Facebook and you say, well, why not all of my friends liked this Facebook post when this is so compelling? And you know, if they're good people, they should be liking this because this is a good cause. Why they don't do that? Because people don't like things necessarily because of the cause. People like things and they want to be part of things or share things when they feel motivated, compelled, that something in their stomach, in their heart makes them do that. So emotion, urgency, inspiration, and a call to action is the way to go to write these messages.
That's great. I think the only thing I would add, it sounds like, you know, there's been some email, maybe contact, and then wanting to follow up with those folks, encourage them either to follow you on social or to act. I've seen some really great calls to action specifically to share on social media. And that's a campaign template that we even have, that maybe your one ask is not to sign a petition or contact a lawmaker, but the one ask is for your advocates to share on social media. We can set those campaign templates up. You can track how many people share on Twitter or Facebook. And it can be a great follow-up. So after someone has emailed their lawmaker, perhaps the follow-up is, you know, thank you for doing this. Really how we can move the needles. If you can share and get 5 more people to take action, you know, our voices are going to be heard. So being clear and concise and not even that call to action to share on their social media.
Yeah, and if you look at Ariana Grande's and Billie Eilish campaigns on Instagram about elections, they're using the tripling strategy. They said, okay, you're registered to vote, fine, go and find 3 more people to do that. So this encouragement to get their friends is working for already in advocacy and in elections. So you like Steffi said, don't feel shy about asking to do that, because that could actually be easier to ask that people are not thinking about doing.
And again, the compelling infographic image, you can even share a YouTube video if you have something that's been developed. Great content encourages advocates to share.
Short video, very short video, 90 seconds or less is what people are seeing. And remember one video used to, the best practice 7 years ago was 3 minutes for a video. Today is 90 seconds.
Wow.
The attention span gets shorter and shorter. But if you have a story, any story that is just very compelling, and if you can rewrite it or capture a picture or capture the message somehow, or the video, I mean, those are the best for social shares.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've talked a little bit about this already, but the rate of return by acquisition channel, Jimena mentioned some of our partners that were doing a lot of paid acquisition, maybe through lead ad generation on Facebook. So pre-COVID, that was where we were seeing the highest rate of return for acquisition. And that's actually gone to the very bottom now. And we're seeing those social shares on Facebook, the repeat advocate rate. So 30% of the folks that come in through those social shares on Facebook are becoming repeat advocate action takers. SMS keywords. So those that were able to join us a couple weeks ago, we really walked through texting in, you know, Grassroots to 40639 and how that experience is. And that's continued to be a high rate of return for advocate acquisition, even during COVID, Facebook or social shares on Twitter. We've talked a little bit about the social share aspect, and I want to talk a little bit about actually tweeting to lawmakers. So we'll walk through an example, but the Tweet the Lawmaker tool continues to be effective in grabbing lawmakers' attention. It can really position you above the noise. And as I think about a lot of the state level and local level campaigns that many are running today, 2 or 3 tweets to a state or local lawmaker can make all the difference in the world. Oftentimes these lawmakers are checking their own social media. And so as you think about the impact that just a few tweets can make, don't underestimate that. We've also found, as Jimena mentioned, not to count out baby boomers and their willingness to tweet. Maybe you ran a campaign before that was encouraging advocates to tweet and it didn't do super well, maybe pre-COVID. I would encourage you to try again. There's increased engagement, excitement to communicate with lawmakers on this. And we did see that over 10% of the people that took action and sent tweets on this professional beauty association were people over 65 years old. So I'm going to transition. Maybe Jimena wants to add a few things, and I'm going to pull up an example of a Tweet to Lawmaker campaign just so we can walk through that together.
Yeah, Twitter has become a kind of like a very standard tool that lawmakers are using. In 2012, not every member of Congress had Twitter. We start seeing 100% of penetration of Twitter adoption by lawmakers in 2015. So that's only 5 years ago. But in the past years, you know, especially during COVID, and with the president that is very active on Twitter, this has changed. So if you didn't look at Twitter before, I encourage you to look at it now, because I think it's the platform, even so more than Facebook, that is going to continue to be engaged in the advocacy and political conversation.
And this is a great campaign. I think Kim might even be on the line around this North Carolina campaign to close the health insurance coverage gap.
I am here.
Oh, hi. Well, we're showing off your campaign and really clear instructions. Enter your information, click tweet, and the message will pop up and you can post directly. So from here, I'm going to click find my legislator. And this is automatically going to tweet to Governor Roy Cooper and then my representative and senator. The information has been pre-populated. I can customize this a little bit if I want to, but then I go and I post the tweet, and we'll actually walk through what that looks like on the Twitter side. I'm gonna refresh this. And you will see. So here's the NC governor. Other states are taking this opportunity to expand healthcare coverage. Would you consider closing the health insurance coverage gap as well? And this is a great way to allow advocates to take action. And again, what we're seeing is an increase in willingness both on the millennials, Gen Zs, but also the boomers to be willing to engage in this way. I'll walk through a couple different findings just in terms of the types of campaigns where we saw the most activity, and share my screen here again. Alrighty. So a couple different ways that you can set this up is to have a campaign that only encourages advocates to tweet like we just walked through. That's the one call to action, the one option for an advocate to take. Another setup is to have a tweet and then an option to email, a tweet and a call, or have a combination of all three actions, the tweet, email, and call. And what we found is if Twitter is really your highest priority, the top campaigns were tweet only. So instead of adding, an ability to tweet, email, and call, really just to isolate this one action and encourage advocates to tweet. A close second was the combination of the tweet and email that you see here in this Professional Beauty Association campaign. All right, and another best practice, again, or speaking to the choir here, I know many of you all work on local and state level issues, but just a reminder that not every decision is made in Washington. So this is a little bit of a map from a couple months the month post-COVID, and just even highlighting legislators that are open or closed. So I know Jimena has some really interesting findings about what was going on in Michigan and Florida that I'd love for you to share as well.
Yeah, so the blue dot here means, I mean, the size of the dot means size of the advocacy activity. So actions of people, mobilization. So the volume is the size, and the color is whether the legislature was closed or it was open. So open is blue, orange is closed. We measured this during between March 13 and May 30th. And this picture here shows you how across the board, there was no state that had no advocacy, no one state that had advocacy. And I'm not talking about mayors, city councils that are always open. This is a state legislature advocacy. At some point, only 13 states were open. Everything else was adjourned, and we still saw that it was advocacy almost at the same level, as you can see by the size of the dot. So you see, blue and orange in places in the country, almost equal size. That means that people were mobilizing at the same level, whether the legislature was closed or open. Michigan had tremendous increase, over 1,300% increase between March and May. And we saw states like Michigan, like Florida, that it was a closed and adjourned legislative session, as opposed to Michigan that had more than tripled their level of advocacy. So the bottom line is that people do not remember or may not care, which is a great thing, that their legislators are closed. So even in Georgia, when the activity is only a few weeks, people were activating in May. They're activating now, and they're trying to talk to those lawmakers. And those lawmakers know. And so not because they're not in office, they're really off, especially this year. So the takeaway there is that do not, I think that we have to rethink about the schedules that we used to have. Not every interaction should be necessarily aligned to a bill, because you can influence your lawmakers way before a bill and get them warm up. And so when you have a bill in front of you, they're already educated around your issue, because they are hearing from advocates about things no matter what, all through the year. So do not feel that you're restricted by the legislative schedule.
Yeah, I saw some really interesting actions take the form of thank you to lawmakers or petitions in some of these states where the state legislature was adjourned. And so thinking creatively about how to navigate that is really a takeaway here. I think people are seeing local lawmakers pass legislation that impacts them now more than ever. And so just capitalizing on that. And closing out our final best practice is that we understand it's normal to worry about overtaxing your advocates. But what we're seeing in the data is that there is momentum like none other time, and there's no need to slow down. So the appetite is there, and as Amanda mentioned, if they're not taking action with you all, they're potentially going to be taking action somewhere else. We haven't seen a downward trend, and there's advocacy organizations that have launched multiple campaigns within the same month. So oftentimes 50% of our organizations were even creating more than a campaign per week. So thinking about running potentially a federal, state, or local campaign in parallel. These also can take the form of something more like a survey. So this is the National Parks Conservation Association. And so didn't have necessarily a legislative ask for their advocates, but they want to use this time to survey their advocates. So what issues matter to you the most? Protecting wildlife, protecting clean air. There's also the petition that I pulled from the Voices for Healthy Kids website. So petitions being evergreen, always a good time to run petitions. So even if the issue isn't COVID related, encourage you to engage your advocates in other ways, inviting them to events, pledges, petitions, etc. We've seen the highest advocacy activity since Phone to Action's inception 7 years ago. Advocates are motivated, they're engaged, so don't miss out on that opportunity. And one final thing that I'll send to the team to send as a follow-up is kind of a best practices guide for virtual events. That could take the form of a virtual lobby day, a virtual day of action, a training. Some of the rationale there is to really build a sense of community among your advocates, to highlight your legislative priorities ahead of session, give a platform for your advocates to share their stories, and just demonstrate the value of what it means to be an advocate within your organization. So it's going to have even a checklist, some ways to prepare, things to do afterwards, thanking your advocates. So be on the lookout for that information as well. So we have just a couple more minutes. If there's any questions from the audience, we're happy to field those or cover anything else.
I have a couple questions, Stephanie. So going back to who's been taking action, do engagement tactics differ based on the generation you're trying to target?
Yeah, maybe pass that one to Mena to start, and then I have a couple thoughts as well.
But the one thing that is important to remember is that older people, people that are over 65 require more accessibility tools used. So font is a big one, and jargon is a no-no. And then for millennials and Gen Zs, especially Gen Zs, urban language helps. So they feel a little bit more connected. This is why the celebrities are so involved in campaigns for headcount, for example, or similar organizations, because it's a little bit more of a cultural alignment there that they have. So you every time you see Ariana Grande or Billie Eilish or any of this in these campaigns, is because the audience resonates to the cultural match that they have with this singer, not necessarily their music, but also the way that they feel are around the same age. So that is an alignment that you do wanna make. We saw that education is driven by women advocacy. 65% of women take action in education campaigns. So any type, I see that a lot of the audience are involved in education efforts. So, everything, the language is more warm, is more nurturing, is more maternal, is losing. It's always a little bit negative, but it's about losing some of those things. And then the last thing for text message, when you send the text message out, is that you do want to make sure that you don't use any language that is legislative language, because especially for boomers and Gen Xers, when they see legislation, like let's say, for example, Senate Bill 451, they want to read the bill. So that are groups that are a little bit more skeptical of anything that they don't see, even though if they trust your organization. So the ask on text message has to be a little bit more general, unless your text message audience is extremely knowledgeable about that bill. Otherwise, people will be like, I don't know which bill is, I'm not gonna take action. While a Gen Z or a millennial necessarily are gonna question that so much. Older ages will do.
And just for clarity, when you say millennial, is that inclusive of those who are overlapped with Gen X, or are we focusing on the younger millennials and the overlap of Gen Z?
So so Gen X is, well, this is interesting because the groups change every year. So people say, no, I'm still a millennial. Well, it kind of changes because you used to call millennials people that were at the end of, age 38, 39 years old. And now the statisticians are actually moving a little younger. So, but even though millennials are getting older, so the Gen Z, so what we normally find in the research is that Gen Xers are anyone over 39. That's very established. And for Gen Zs are anyone that is under 21. Is a safe Gen Z, and everything between 21 and 39 is a millennial. Although, like I said, you know, those numbers kind of shift every year a little bit. And Gen Xers is a long one because Gen Xers for a long time were used to be two groups. So still today, if you look at Pew Research or any of those, they separate the groups in two, and you have to put them together. And this is why it's very easy to miss that millennials are the largest a group taking action all the time, because they're normally separated into brackets of age. But that's everything in the middle.
Thanks, Jimena. Probably have time for one more question. So are you all seeing any difference during the pandemic in terms of how lawmakers are receiving actions taken by advocates? Are any tactics working better than others now that many council meetings are being done via Zoom and other virtual platforms?
So the playbook for lawmakers engaging with advocates shifted on the benefit of advocates, because lawmakers in the past could ignore an advocate because advocates will come to them, especially in Congress. And they paid a lot of, you know, they had their ear with lobbying organizations and lobbyists and government affairs professionals and K Street. And none of that is happening right now. So the advocate is the pulse that the lawmakers are getting about their constituency. So more than ever, advocates have a say so. And teletown halls are kind of hard to follow, because if you are in a teletown hall and you wanted to ask a question, you're probably very unlikely are going to be picked, because a lot of people want to ask questions and they may have a teletown hall with 1,000 people, so you won't get a chance to talk. But Facebook events, Facebook live events where they have the chat open, or Zoom web conferences, sometimes they only have like 20 people, 15, 20 people. Is pretty incredible that lawmakers in the beginning of the pandemic, they used to get very high numbers, but you know, later on, not as much. So that's a really good opportunity to come in and ask a question on the chat or ask a question in person. And what I have seen, I've done a few conversations with lawmakers. I did one for NCSL a few weeks ago, and a few others. And what I have found is that they're extremely receptive of having a conversation about issues with people, no matter whether they're new to technology, they're all adapting. So this is really a good thing that COVID and social distance has bring. And we have at least, you know, 6-7 months of this, because with winter coming in, the offices are probably going to be closed all the way to the spring of next year. To some extent, social distance is going to remain. And so you have the opportunity to engage with them outside of the legislative season, especially after the election, or they're going to pay a lot of attention to you before the election, especially those that are campaigning. But this is where you make friends, and you don't know this. They lose, then they come back in 2 years. So this is where you do want to build those relationships with them. You just don't know what's going to happen in the future, and if they remember, you know that they're going to be more likely to be interested in your causes later on.
Awesome. Thank you, Mena, and thank you, Stephanie, for your time. And thank you all for joining this training. We hope it was informative and helpful. I just want to remind you all to register for the next webinar series on September 30th that will go over social media for advocacy. I also posted a link in the chat for an evaluation survey of this training session. I encourage you to take the survey, as we appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was great talking to everyone today.